Hey Parker Hill, welcome to LCBC York. Man, first of all, I can't believe that we're having this conversation, that we're considering the possibility of partnering together to impact the whole state of Pennsylvania. I mean, so many of you that I walked so many years with there at Parker Hill, at the Dickson City campus, at the Clark Summit campus, and even the Wilkes-Barre campus. And so now for us to be in these conversations, to be better together, man, it's just incredible to me, the story that God is writing. So I want to introduce you to LCBC York. This location used to be a Saturn car dealership, but 9 years ago, we launched the location here, and it's super cool because we are sitting on the intersection of one of the most busy roads in York County, Route 30 and North Hills Road. And so we have tens of thousands of cars that pass by here every single day. And God has used that. In fact, just this last week, I heard a lady say, I've driven by that location for 2 years, and God was saying something inside me, I've got to stop. She was here last week. She was here for Easter. And it's just unbelievable how Katie's story is being rewritten that way. So, Saturn car dealership. And you're familiar with this. You know the Dickson City location. That was an old movie theater. The church isn't the building. The church is the people that gather in a place. And we just love what God has been doing here over the last 9 years. I'd love to show you around. So right now we're in the studio, which used to be the service bay at the Saturn dealership, but now it's a place where students connect with God and others. And so on Sundays, this is just a super fun environment for middle school age students, and then on Wednesday nights for high school age students. I love what happens in this room every week for students. It's a safe place for them to connect with God and others. And let me share a story with you that happened just a couple of months ago. It was Mackenzie, and she was here. She came up to her small group leader after group on Wednesday night, and she said, this is the only place that's safe for me each week and the only place I look forward to going all week long. And man, that just spoke volumes to her small group leader and to us. That's the kind of place we want to create. But her small group leader was smart. She said, hey, well, why don't you come back again on Sunday? And she's like, well, my parents don't come to church. She said, well, did they drop you off? She asked her parents and they said yes. And so now Mackenzie comes to LCBC twice a week. She comes to HSM on Wednesday nights, and then she serves in Treasure Cove with 2 to 5 year olds. And she has a place that she looks forward to being every single week. She just told her small group leader this last week that I've been thinking about being with those kids like all week long. Love how God is using our student environment and our kid ministry environment to see another life changed by Christ. Our kid ministry environments, they're so similar to what you experience at Parker Hill. I know that Epic Kids is epic at Parker Hill, and it's a place where kids can't wait to go. And it's the same way here at LCBC and Kid Ministry and Kid Venture Island. We use the same curriculum, and the cool thing is kids can't wait to get here. I met a couple just a couple of months ago. It was their first time back in the building in a year. And they told me after the gathering, they said, the only reason why we're here right now is because our 2 little girls, they kept begging us to go back to church. Like, they enjoyed what was happening online, but they couldn't wait to be back in the kid ministry environments. Parker Hill, it's been so good having you visit us virtually in York today. I can't wait to see you again. In fact, a couple months ago, I was able to visit Wilkes-Barre and Dickson City. It was so good to see so many of you there. You're welcome here to visit anytime or our other locations to check out what's happening. Right now, our doors are about to open, the gathering's about to get started, so we'll see you soon.
It's great to get a glimpse into LCBC's York campus, and it's so good to see my friend Mark Fitch there on screen. And the reason why we've shown you a couple of those video tours is because we want you to see how much our church is already aligned with LCBC as we think about the prospect of a possible merger. And that's what we've been talking about during the month of April. We're talking about our future together as a church and how we can make the greatest possible impact here in northeastern Pennsylvania. And so I've set aside these 4 weeks just to share with you what's on my heart and to do my best to explain why I believe that a merger is the best path forward for Parker Hill Church. Now, some of you may be thinking, Mark, why are we spending 4 weeks talking about this? Well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, this is a very complicated decision. There are lots of different factors, lots of different nuances. And number two, this is a very important decision. This decision will shape our future as a church and the future of the gospel here in northeastern Pennsylvania. And because this is such an important decision and such a complicated one, it's essential that we take the time for all of us to get a thorough understanding of this opportunity. See, our leaders have spent literally hundreds of hours in discussion and thought and prayer. And so it's my job to take all that discussion, thought, and prayer and to try to boil it down so that you can see what we see and know what we know and hopefully have the same excitement that we feel about the future. So we spent the first 2 weeks talking about the practical side of this. Today I want to talk more about the emotional side of this. Because whenever we face change in our lives of any kind, there's certain emotions that rise to the surface, like uncertainty and apprehension and maybe even fear. And there's a principle that I've learned in my own spiritual journey. It goes like this: fear can be the enemy of opportunity. In other words, there are going to be times in our lives when we sense God prompting us to do something or to change something in our personal lives or to say something, but fear holds us back. And so many times the greatest opportunities of our lives are just on the other side of our fear. Fear can be the enemy of opportunity. Let me give you an example of this idea, first of all, from the business world. So one of the biggest companies in U.S. history was Kodak Film. But Kodak filed for bankruptcy in 2012. But at one point, Kodak sold 90% of the camera film that was purchased in the entire world. And they were one of the most profitable corporations on the planet. Do you know what it was that brought Kodak to the point of bankruptcy? It was digital photography. Yeah, the first digital camera was invented in 1975. It was pretty crude, pretty simple, just kind of cobbled together. But the guy who invented it was an engineer named Steve Sasson there in the picture. Do you know who Steve Sasson worked for? He worked for Kodak. But the executives at Kodak weren't crazy about the whole idea of digital photography. In fact, a few years ago, Steve was interviewed for a newspaper article, and he said this. He said, they were convinced that no one would ever want to look at their pictures on a television screen. Besides, digital cameras would take away from our film sales, and we made a great deal of money on film. I knew it was just a matter of time, but Kodak wouldn't embrace the new technology. That camera never saw the light of day. So Kodak put the technology in a locked vault and didn't pursue it any further. Eventually, other companies like Sony and Canon began making their own digital cameras, but by the time Kodak realized their mistake, it was too late. You see, fear can be the enemy of opportunity. And what's true in business is even more true in our spiritual lives. So many times, our greatest opportunities are just on the other side of our fear. I want to show you an example of this principle in Scripture. It comes from the book of Joshua. And if you know the history of the Jewish people, you know that God had promised them that they would someday possess a land that was all their own, a place where they could live together as a community of God's people. And the Bible describes this promised land as a land that was flowing with milk and honey. And so after traveling through the wilderness, they eventually arrive at the edge of this promised land. Let's pick up the story together in Joshua chapter 1. It says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give to them, to the Israelites. Now, in order to understand what's happening here, let me give you a 30-second geography lesson. So the Jordan River runs north to south, and it was on the eastern border of what would become the nation of Israel. And once they crossed over that river, they would be home. They would be in the land that God had promised to them so many generations before. On the other side of that river was fertile land for their crops and herds. On the other side of that river was the place where they could live in freedom, the place where they would prosper as a nation. See, the Jordan River was really the dividing line between their past and their future. So let me pick up in verse 10. So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, get your supplies ready. 3 days from now you will cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. Now, here's what you have to understand. Crossing the Jordan would be more difficult than it might sound to us. The word Jordan literally means to descend, because the Jordan River starts in the north at the foot of Mount Hermon and flows south until it reaches the Dead Sea, the lowest point on earth. And so from the beginning of that river to the end, the elevation drops more than 2,000 feet, which made it a very fast-flowing river. But then, to make things even more complicated, look what it says a couple of chapters later in chapter 3. It says, now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. So normally the Jordan River was about 100 feet wide and 6 feet deep. But during flood stage, when they arrived there, it would be about 10 times wider and twice as deep as it normally was. And the water would have been flowing very quickly. Now you have to remember, this was a group of thousands and thousands of people with their livestock, their children, and their possessions. And you have to get all that across a raging river. In fact, listen to what it says on the website of the National Weather Service. It says, a mere 6 inches of fast-moving floodwater can knock over an adult. It takes just 12 inches of rushing water to carry away a small car, while 2 feet of rushing water can carry away most vehicles. It is never safe to drive or walk into floodwaters. But see, they didn't need the National Weather Service to tell them that. They knew what they were facing was an impossible task. And think about it. They had come all this way. I mean, they could literally see the promised land. They could smell it. But as far as they could tell, it was impossible to get to it. So here's my question for you. What is the Jordan River in your life? What is the barrier you're facing that stands between where you are now and where you need to be? Because there will be times in life when we try to move from where we are to where God wants us to be, and we will face opposition. We will face challenges and setbacks. Following God's will for our lives will rarely be easy. Let me show you what happens next. It's fascinating. We'll skip ahead to chapter 3. Chapter 3. It says this, after 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp giving orders to the people. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God and the Levitical priests carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. Now remember, the Ark of the Covenant, which, by the way, is what Indiana Jones was looking for in Raiders of the Lost Ark. The Ark of the Covenant was the most sacred treasure of the Jewish people. It was the visible symbol of God's presence among them. And so it goes on to say this, but keep a distance, he says to the people, of about 1,000 yards between you and the ark. Do not go near it. And here's why. Because they wanted the Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence, to be way out in front of the crowd, in plain sight, where everybody could see it. Because they needed to have the assurance that God was going before them. That as crazy as it was to try and cross this river, they needed to know that this was exactly where God was calling them to go. So Joshua sends the Ark of the Covenant out ahead of the people where they could see it. And then here's what happens next. And the Lord said to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so that they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, when you reach the edge of Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river. So Joshua says to the priests, listen guys, here's what I need you to do. You see that raging river over there? I need you to walk out into that and stand there. Again, the Jordan River was at flood stage, probably 12 feet deep. The water is coming fast and furious. And these guys are carrying the Ark of the Covenant that weighs several hundred pounds. And it was the most sacred object of the Jewish people. Walking into the middle of a raging river made no sense. But God said, I want you to take your next step. And when they stepped into that water, there had to be a lot of fear in their hearts, right? But they stepped in anyway. And here's what happened, verse 15. Now the Jordan is at flood stage, all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan, and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. That must have been so fascinating. I wish I had been there. I can't wait to see the replay in heaven someday. So here's the question. Here's the question. When did the water stop flowing? Here's the answer. When their feet got wet. You see, before they ever saw the power of God, they had to take a step of faith. Here's the way we say it around here. I've said this so many times. When we step forward, God steps in. When we step forward, God steps in. If you read through the Bible, you see that theme from cover to cover. God's power flows through people who are willing to take a step forward, even when there's some fear and uncertainty. And when we step forward, that's when God steps in. So let me give you two questions. One question we need to answer personally, and a second question we need to answer collectively as a church. So question number one is this: what step is God calling me to take? What is the Jordan River in your life? Where is God calling you to take a step of faith? Because here's what I know. We all eventually face our own Jordan River. We all face these barriers that can keep us from entering into the life that God has for us. And we can be filled with fear and apprehension, and God says, listen, I've already gone ahead of you. I'll make a way for you, but you've got to choose. You have to step forward. For some of you, that might mean walking away from a toxic relationship or letting go of a lifestyle that has a grip on your life, even though you don't want to walk away from that. It might mean reaching out to someone in your neighborhood and serving that person and being a blessing to that person, or engaging them in a spiritual conversation, but that's a little bit unnerving for you. It might mean taking a next step in your spiritual journey, like finding a small group and introducing yourself, or finding a place to serve, or getting baptized like so many of our students did this past week, which was amazing. What step is God calling me to take, you to take? And what fear is holding you back from taking that step? But there's a second question that we need to answer right now, and it's this question: what step is God calling us to take? And you know, over the years as a church, we have come to these Jordan River moments many times. Times where we have had together to take a step that involves some risk, a step that requires faith. And I believe that we've come to one of those times again. Our leadership believes that the best next step for our church is to join forces with another multi-site church here in Pennsylvania. Now, we've seen God do some amazing things through this church for many, many years, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But there is still so much to be done here in northeastern Pennsylvania. But we believe we can be even better together. That in this relationship with another church, we can move further, faster, and be even stronger. But you may have some fears. You may have some uncertainty. And that's normal. But let me tell you two things we all need to help us combat those fears, okay? The first thing we need is this: we need information. Because sometimes our fear comes from just not knowing what's ahead. And the way to fight fear is with facts. You know, when Debbie and I were expecting our first child, there was a little bit of fear in our hearts. There was a little bit of apprehension. Because, you know, face it, we knew nothing about taking care of a newborn baby. It was a whole new experience for us. So we bought a book. It's called What to Expect the First Year. It came after another book called What to Expect When You're Expecting, but What to Expect the First Year. And in this book, there was lots of detailed information about how to take care of a newborn, and it was broken down like month by month by month. And it was very, very helpful. From what I understand, because I didn't actually read it, but my wife did. But she said it was helpful. But here's my point. Knowing what to expect took away some of our fear. And that's why we're trying to provide you with as much information as possible about this merger proposal. That's why we're spending 4 weeks talking about this. And then in addition to these messages, you should have received a view book in the mail. Read that carefully. Please read it over very thoroughly. And then if you have questions, just let us know, and you can ask any question that you want to ask or even send a comment by just sending an email to merger@parkerhill.org, merger@parkerhill.org. And then next week, I'm going to wrap up this series by answering some of the most common questions that we've been getting, okay? So if we're going to fight our fear, we need information. Second thing that we need to fight our fear is this. We need trust. Like in order for the people of Israel to step into the Jordan River, they had to trust God. But they also had to trust in their leader, Joshua. In fact, go back to chapter 1. It says, the Lord said to Joshua. In other words, it was Joshua who had received this word from God to go into the promised land and cross the Jordan River, and he was passing this along to the people. So the people of Israel had to trust in his word and in his leadership. And because the people of Israel trusted God, first of all, and because they trusted Joshua, it was a little bit easier to step into the river. And so as we process this decision together as a church, I think one thing that will be helpful in overcoming any fear that we may have is to get to know the leadership of LCBC Church. And I know them well, our staff knows them well, but if you can begin to build a relationship with them, and in the process of that building relationship, you will begin to build trust. Here's a great opportunity to do that. We're offering a class called First Steps, and First Steps is actually a class that LCBC offers to anyone who is new to their church. It's a 90-minute class, and you're going to have 2 opportunities to attend this in person this weekend. Okay, so Sunday afternoon or Monday evening, same content at both, just choose the one that best fits your schedule. Our entire staff went through that class a couple of months ago and found it extremely helpful. Again, the class will be about 90 minutes at length, and we are providing childcare up through grade 5, and that class will be led by a couple of LCBC staff members who actually used to be on staff here at Parker Hill. So please register ahead of time. If you can, parkerhill.org/LCBC. Register for, First Steps. And then also coming up, we have some vision meetings as well, and those will be a great opportunity to meet a lot of the LCBC staff at those events as well, because the best way to counteract fear is to, number 1, gather information, and number 2, to build trust. And that's what we hope to do throughout this process, okay? So let me go back to the story of the people of Israel. Once the people of Israel were safely across the Jordan River, they did something that's just amazing. Chapter 4 tells how they took 12 stones from the bottom of the Jordan River and then used them to build a monument so that they would always have a reminder of what God had done in that place. Joshua chapter 4, it says this, in the future when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. In other words, in the future, they would bring their children and grandchildren to that place and show them this monument of 12 stones and tell them the story of how God stopped a raging river and made a way for his people. And I think one of the best things you can do in your life is to find ways to create memorials, to create tangible reminders of God's goodness and faithfulness to you. And maybe you do that through a written journal, or maybe do that through some kind of symbols, but I think it's so important to memorialize some of those God moments in your life. And here's why, because it's the memory of God's faithfulness in our past that will calm our fears as we face the challenges of the future. So I try to do that. I keep a number of objects on a bookshelf in my office that may seem kind of strange to most people, but they're symbols and reminders to me of God's faithfulness over the years, like this milk bottle. I actually have a few of these on my bookshelf. We uncovered some of these when we were doing the excavation for a building project in 1993 at our Clark Summit location. On the front of the bottle, it says Parker Brothers Dairy, because our Clark Summit building is located on land that was once part of the Parker Brothers Dairy Farm, and that area of Clark Summit was known as Parker Hill. And so we found some of these when we were doing that first building project. That was 28 years ago. I'd only been a pastor for about 5 years. Debbie and I had just gotten married. I had no experience in building projects. I mean, we didn't even own a home yet. And we were moving from an auditorium that would seat 80 people to one that would seat over 300 people. We were adding about 12,000 square feet to the building. When we broke ground for that building project, our total annual income at that time was $117,000. That was our entire budget as a church. So obviously, I had some fears we got into that project. We had to take out a mortgage to pay for it. I wondered if we would ever be able to make the mortgage payment. I mean, there were times in the construction process when we ran short of cash. At one point, I had $18,000 worth of materials on my own credit card. And there were so many times when I felt so far in over my head. And I remember walking through that new auditorium once it was completed. And I thought to myself, do we really need all this space? I mean, did we overbuild here? Turns out we did need all that space. And by the way, the mortgage was paid off within 3 years. And nowadays, when I face challenges in my life that seem overwhelming, I look at this milk bottle on my shelf. And I remember a time when a little group of God's people took a big step of faith. And we saw God step in a big way. Here's something else I keep in my office. I have this piece of paper in a frame. It's actually a ballot from a church vote that took place in 2003. 18 years ago in 2003, a small group of believers from another church were trying to decide what their future would be. And they began a conversation with us about merging with Parker Hill Church. And after a lot of thought and prayer and discussion, their members came together for a final vote. And they voted that night to merge with our church. Now, anyone who was at that meeting that night would tell you that that was not an easy decision for them. It was a long meeting. Some of them had a hard time letting go of their identity and their autonomy and all the memories attached to their building. But in the end, they voted to merge. And I keep this ballot because of what's written on it. It's signed by Elaine Mahoney, one of the members. She passed away in 2012. But under her signature, she wrote this, "For the glory of God." In other words, she made what would have been for her a difficult decision, but it was not a decision she made for her own benefit, but as she wrote there, "For the glory of God." As a result of that merger, we were given their church building in Glenburn, just 2.5 miles away from our Clark Summit location. We weren't sure what to do with the building at first. I mean, we needed the space, but weren't sure what to do with the building. And eventually, we decided to try something that was very new at that time, something called multi-site ministry. So every Sunday, we would broadcast the weekend message on video in that building. And well, the same time, the same message was being taught live at our Clark Summit campus. And we discovered that this multi-site thing really did work. In fact, it worked so well that we decided to add another campus in Dixon City. And then people started driving up from Wilkes-Barre to attend our Dixon City campus, which resulted in some folks from Wilkes-Barre generously providing the initial funding to start another campus there in Luzerne County. The end result is that thousands of lives have been changed. All because this little group of believers, including Elaine, who said, "For the glory of God," all because they made a tough decision, and when they stepped forward, God stepped in. Let me show you one more thing I keep in my office on the bookshelf. This is a bingo card, because the area where we have our staff offices used to be a bingo hall. In fact, right outside my office door was the spot where the guy would sit to call the numbers. And I found this card when we were cleaning out the building in 2010. Now, I wish I had the time to tell you the whole story of how we were able to find that location for our Dixon City campus. It was an amazing set of circumstances. I would even say miraculous. But I can still remember sitting in the attorney's office and signing the paperwork for that building. and then signing the paperwork for a bank loan to cover the cost of the remodeling of that building and our Clark Summit campus, $6 million. It was a huge step, and to be honest, I felt like it was a gamble, but I think faith always feels a little bit like that, like a gamble. And so I keep this bingo card as a reminder that my life is not driven by chance. My life and our life as a church is in the hands of a sovereign God, and He orchestrates events, and He opens doors. And when we follow His leading and step forward, He steps in. I keep stuff like this on a shelf in my office because I need to be reminded of God's faithfulness in the past as I face the challenges of the present and the future. I hope you can find ways to do that as well in your life, just to tangibly remember those times when God came through for you. So, I realize that what we've been talking about with the merger is a pretty significant change, and it may seem a bit strange or even risky. But in the 33 years that I've been here, you folks and I, we have never hesitated to take risks or make changes when we believe that those changes will result in reaching more people who are not yet followers of Christ. Because sometimes our greatest opportunities are on the other side of our fears. I'm going to wrap up, but I want you to hear the story of a young man named Kevin. Kevin grew up in this church. In fact, he's actually part of my extended family. And after graduating from high school, Kevin attended Penn State University, and then he moved to Harrisburg, where he took his first job. And after he was settled in, he and his fiancée went looking for a church to attend. And they found a church there in Harrisburg where they felt completely at home. But let me tell you the story behind the church in Harrisburg that they found. A few minutes ago, I mentioned that in 2003, we merged with another church in Glenburn and then became a multi-site church. Well, about a year after that, a small team of people came to visit our new campus in Glenburn because they wanted to learn more about multi-site and whether it could really work. It was a team of people from Lancaster County Bible Church, now known as LCBC. And then shortly after their visit with us, they took what they had learned from us and a few other churches, and they launched their first multi-site location in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And that was the church where Kevin and Carly found their spiritual home together as a couple. Only God could orchestrate that. Watch this with me.
I'm Kevin.
I'm Carly.
And we attend the LCBC Harrisburg campus. So I grew up in the church pretty much from birth, attended Parker Hill. I think I was 5 years old when I first accepted Christ into my heart, and then I was baptized, I think around 12 or 13 years old.
I grew up in the Catholic Church. Every Sunday it was Sunday school and we'd go to Mass, and it was something I did, but it wasn't something I guess I believed at that point. I definitely fell away from faith throughout my college years. I never connected growing up. I never really felt that I had a relationship with God. It was something that you were taught, but it just was never a connection on my end. I felt like I prayed and I didn't hear anything, so it was like, well, why would I do this? I don't need to. And I really didn't have any intention of trying to come back into my faith.
Once I graduated, moved to Harrisburg, the Harrisburg area for work. I knew I wanted to find a church similar to where I grew up, that same style, and through some friends of mine had come across LCBC. My first impressions of it when I first attended LCBC when I moved here to Harrisburg in 2016, first impression was still that warm, welcoming feeling. Everything from the worship to the message, the entire experience was almost strangely similar. Mm-hmm. I invited my wife, my then girlfriend, to her first service at Parker Hill. It was a pretty easy invite.
I was very nervous, and it was, I think, harder because Kevin hadn't attended a Catholic Mass. All I knew was one way, and Kevin only knew his way. So I figured I would just do to say I went, kind of please everybody, and I didn't really think twice about it ever truly impacting my life. It was so warming to walk in, have someone welcome you right away. Thanks for joining us. Like, You know, I hope you enjoy your time, enjoy the service, and just welcome one another. And then stepping into the service, and when the music started, I instantly knew this is so different. So I was a little intrigued then, because it was like, oh, I have never experienced something like this. So I moved back to Harrisburg, where Kevin was living at that point. So it wasn't really a hard sell when he said, hey, I think we should go to church and implement church on like our daily life. And LCBC, I've been to a couple times. It's just like Parker Hill. It was an easy step because I'd already felt so welcomed from a church that I was being told was so similar to what could potentially be our new home church. I think around like November of 2019, I had really been grappling with nudges and trying to identify if they were nudges by God. We had been at LCBC long enough where I felt like I was toying with the idea of faith, and I knew he existed, and I knew that he was there. And I'd say probably by the time December hit, I had a moment. I was in church. Jason Mitchell was giving a sermon, and he felt like he was speaking right to me. And it was kind of at that moment, I was like, okay, God, like this is it. Like I hear you. I think I know you hear me now, and I hear you. And this is what I want to do. I'm going to follow you. I'm going to give my life to you. I'm going to dedicate the way I carry my life out in a way that honors you. And I think probably a month later, I came to Kevin and told him, you know, I've had this moment. I've had some time to process this moment. And I really think that now I want to declare to everybody that I had that moment. So we moved forward with the baptism process, probably the biggest step I've made as an adult. And to be able to say that I've given my life to Christ and feel good about telling everybody that in such a huge manner was really, really a huge thing for me.
I'm Kevin.
I'm Carly, and we're
Lives
Lives Changed by Christ.